Hello and welcome back. It's David with Ural Motorcycles out behind the headquarters in Redmond, Washington. And this week we're going to be talking about how to load your bike and the sidecar for long distance travel. The Urals are geared and tuned primarily for off-road use while still being capable of long distance travel. But the ability to do both does restrict the maximum speed to about 70 miles per hour. That 70 miles per hour is the bike and you with no additional passenger or payload. So to clarify, in the owner's manual, it states a rider with no passenger or payload, the max recommended speed is 65 to 70 miles per hour. A rider and passenger together with no payload, you're looking at 60 to 65 miles per hour. Now, a rider, passenger up to max payload, the recommended top speed is 50 to 60 miles per hour. So how did we determine these numbers? Or how did the factory rather determine these numbers? So let me try and explain using a gear up as an example. The max permissible weight for a gear up is 1,325 pounds. Now, the dry weight of a gear up is 730 pounds. That's the bare bike with no accessories and no fluids. So you deduct 730 from 1,325, and that leaves you with 595. But it clearly states in the manual that the max permissible load for a gear up is 590 pounds. So why the 5-pound difference? Well, there's a margin of error that's cooked in there, and you have to take into consideration the load rating of the tires. So regardless of what the chassis can handle, the load rating of the tires are a limiting factor on how much you can carry on the motorcycle. So let's compare this to the max permissible weight of the CT model. So in the manual, the CT has a max permissible weight of 1,325 pounds, just like the gear up. But the dry weight is actually less than the gear up by 30 pounds. It's stated at 700 pounds. That's the bike dry weight with no accessories. So you deduct 700 from 1,325, and that leaves you with 625 pounds. Well, that's substantially more than the gear up, but the recommended max permissible load for the CT is actually lower at 440 pounds. So why the difference? The difference, again, primarily is in the load rating of the tires and the 18-inch wheels as opposed to the 19-inch wheels that are on the gear up. The 19-inch tires have a higher capacity for load. The swing arms on the CT also have a little bit to play in that their ride height is 6.2 inches on the CT versus the 6.8 inches on the gear up. Now, it's not a lot of difference, but even though they share the same shocks between the chassis, where the swing arm rides on the chassis limits its travel, so you don't want to be overloading that and literally rubbing the tires and the fenders or anything like that. Now, keep in mind, maintaining a high rate of speed all day plus carrying additional cargo and or a passenger affects the temperature of the motor. So planning ahead while riding in warmer temperatures or when the ambient temperature is high will lessen the likelihood that there'll be any unexpected problems. Keeping these basic guidelines in mind when you're loading and preparing for a trip and planning what roads you're going to take is ultimately going to lead to a much more pleasant travel experience on your Ural. Now, I am fully aware that this topic is going to bring people out of the woodwork asking questions like, well, why don't you increase the displacement? Well, why don't you add a fifth gear? Well, rest assured that all these years that you've been asking for those things, we have heard you. This is actually a topic for another video entirely. So I'm not going to address that right here. We're just going to address the motorcycle that is currently in production and how to best load that for carrying a passenger and payload on a longer trip. Let me just put it this way, and I've said this many, many times when I'm out on the road. Regardless of what people think of Ural Motorcycles as a corporation, every day that we work here, it's like working for a startup company. We're not driving around in these Urals with money flowing out of the sidecar. So just know that we hear you and we're trying to make improvements every single day. Sometimes those improvements just don't come quick enough for our longtime riders and those potentially looking at buying a Ural, but know that we are paying attention and we're working towards that common goal. So when you're loading, you don't want to exceed the max permissible weight, which for a gear up is 590 pounds, a CT is 440 pounds. The retro and M70 models that we don't manufacture anymore, those were at 430 max additional payload. Now that's basically what that takes into consideration is you got the bike and the sidecar. The max additional for a gear up being 590 pounds. That would include the rider, the spare tire, the jerry can full of fuel, the fluid in the bike, any accessories. Those are not included on the base weight of the bike that are spec'd out on the owner's manual or online. Take the gear up, for example. We got 590 pounds. Say the pilot, the driver, is 180 pounds. So you deduct 590 or 180 from 590, you got 410 pounds left. Say you have a passenger that weighs approximately 120 pounds. You deduct that from the 410 and it leaves you with 290. Now you take your spare tire, a full tank of gas, the full fluid in the jerry can, whatever that weighs, and you say that's 90 pounds, you just round it up to 90 pounds, you have 200 pounds remaining. That's 200 pounds to divide equally across the sidecar. I can't stress the importance of reading the owner's manual when you're preparing to take a trip or wondering what the load capacity is or what the dry weight is. All of this stuff is available in the owner's manual. If you happen to have misplaced your owner's manual, you can go to our website, which I will put right here, and you can actually go to support and owner's manual and download or view a copy of the owner's manual electronically. In this next part of the video coming up, for demonstration purposes, I'm not going to worry about the max permissible payload capacity of my gear up. I'm going to be using a nice rounded number of 180 pounds and divide that up to show the 70-20-10 recommendation for the loading of the sidecar. Even though it can carry more, just keep in mind that we're only using 180 pounds for demonstration purposes, and I haven't got a lot to use as props. So just keep that in mind going forward. In the owner's manual, it actually divides the sidecar into thirds, here and right behind the seat. So we'll just, I hope you can see that. And what it states is, here in the middle, where the passenger would sit, this is going to be 70% of the load is going to go there. Now the remaining 20 or 30% is going to be divided by 20% here in the trunk or luggage rack on the back, and 10% in the sidecar in the nose or up on a nose rack like I have here. So to demonstrate that, I have my luggage, additional luggage, and then the two bags here, which are 60 pounds each. Those will represent my passenger. So here's my passenger's legs and torso. I'm going to put them in the passenger seat. So there's 120 pounds right there. Okay, then I have my bag of clothes and whatever else, weighing 40 pounds. That'll go on my luggage rack. And this could be tents, sleeping bags, whatever. And then here I have my additional 20 pounds that I'm going to strap to my nose rack. That is how Ural recommends you load the vehicle. 70, 20, 10. Now shock preload, tire pressure, all of this should be appropriate for the terrain and the payload that you're carrying. We will cover this, particularly suspension preload. This was brought up on YouTube as a suggestion for another video. We're going to cover this as another separate topic because there's a lot of information there. An additional thing I'd like to talk about that I don't see covered very much is wind drag. So often this is overlooked when you're trying to balance a payload. For example, say you have a passenger here and maybe you've bought an accessory sidecar windscreen or your bike came stock with it. There's going to be wind drag on that. So if you're traveling all day across an interstate and you're maintaining a pretty high rate of speed, there's going to be wind drag on there that's going to be slowing the bike down. So when you're loading your outfit, you want to be aware of that too. Say you have a whole pile of stuff on the back rack and the weight does not necessarily exceed what you should be putting back there, but it's literally a mountain of stuff. That's going to be dragging the bike down, and speeds, particularly based on the road conditions and the ambient temperature, need to be accommodated to that particular addition. Maybe you need to slow down another 5 miles an hour to save wear and tear on your motor. So aside from wind drag, what is the effect of loading the sidecar improperly? Well, we're actually going to do that next. Okay, so what I've done here, I've taken the 20 pounds off the nose, but I've left the 40 pounds back on the luggage rack and I've strapped that down and I've strapped down my passenger. Now, my bike is perfectly set up as far as the brake bias between the sidecar and the bike for my normal riding, which is me on the motorcycle and my backpack and laptop in the sidecar. That's typically all I ride with. So I'm going to show you everything I just talked about. We're going to show you the real world effects of that without any further adjustments, having 120 pounds here and 40 pounds on the luggage rack, and I'm going to show you what difference it makes just in the straight braking. Now, as you may have noticed, when I accelerated and went into second gear, the bike was lunging to the right. Now that's because that additional payload is dragging behind the unpowered sidecar and the powered motorcycle is trying to leap around it. And then upon braking, even with a properly adjusted sidecar brake for my normal driving, the addition of the 160 pounds in the sidecar made it want to brake and list to the left under normal braking. I showed you that example to demonstrate the effects of the added weight on the sidecar without adjusting the brake bias. Now, if you were going to take an extended trip with added payload, you might want to consider adjusting the brake bias to accommodate the extra load. Without adjusting the brake bias to accommodate for that extra weight, you would have to mitigate the effects of the yaw left and right under acceleration and deceleration with the input that you put into the motorcycle. I'm going to show it to you one more time, slowed down a little bit. See if you can pay attention to the yaw under acceleration and the move to the left when I brake. Okay, now for the last demonstration, I've strapped the 40 pounds to the nose rack and my passenger, both 60-pound bags, all 120 pounds I've laid on the floorboard, which is in the nose and where the foot compartment is for where your passenger would normally sit. So everything is shifted to the front. Now I've done this to show an extreme example of what not to do and the effects it has on your bike. I implore you, do not do this at home, please. So what I'm going to show is what the effect is when you're entering a left-hand turn and braking slightly, how it affects the motorcycle. It's actually going to want to unload the back tire. And this is why it's critical that your load is evenly distributed across the sidecar, primarily in line with the tire, which is where the passenger seat normally is. 70% of your weight needs to go there in order to keep a balanced sidecar. So there you have it, an extreme sample of the effects of improperly loading your sidecar. So that pretty much wraps up this week's video. To conclude, and to quell the naysayers, I just want to tell you a little story. So I had the first Gobi that ever came into the United States. I think it was end of 2009, because I think that came out in 2010. I can't be quite sure. But when it came time for me to sell that bike, I had a gentleman from upstate New York fly in on an Easter weekend in Seattle. He picked up the bike with his wife, and they ended up taking that bike, which was an old carbureted version. They took it all the way through the Redwoods, down the West Coast, through the Southwest, all the way up into Florida, and then all the way back up into upstate New York. We stayed in contact, and still do actually to this day. I've seen him a couple other times as I've been traveling around the United States. The only thing he replaced was 2 pusher tires on the rear and the oil at hotels and rest stops. So don't let anybody tell you it can't be done. You're just gonna have to do it logically and think about what you're doing. It's an air-cooled motor. It's 750 cc's. You don't want to overtax it, or you will run into problems. And anything that you do in the extreme, off-roading or anything like that, even just cruising on a freeway in high temperatures, you're going to want to maintain the rig as you would expect to for anything that you use in an extreme manner. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I sure do appreciate you watching. Please, if you're watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and leave a comment below for any suggestions you have for future videos you'd like to see. Still keeping track of them. I'm not ignoring you folks. And if I don't respond to your comments on YouTube immediately, don't get offended. I still have a regular job to do. And then if you're watching on Facebook, give us a like. And I noticed recently they've been posting my videos on Instagram. I don't really have any control over the comment section there or on Facebook, but if I see something, I'll definitely talk to those who are over those social media accounts and see if I can help them out with an answer. So until next time, take care and ride safe.